I am Amy Paul, 39 years old, and in my mother's eyes, I'm just a washed-up daughter driving a truck to make ends meet. But she doesn't know that just this morning, I stopped a border bombing with a single phone call. However, the greatest pain of my life isn't the gunfire. It's the moment my mother, at our Thanksgiving dinner, pointed a finger at my face in front of the whole family and said, "Look at Nathan, Amy. That is success. And you? How long do you intend to embarrass the Paul family name with those grease-stained workman's clothes?" Nathan, the arms dealer I'm hunting, sat there smirking, looking at me like a pitiful animal needing charity. He didn't know that under the table, my finger was resting on the invisible trigger of a statewide arrest warrant. They think I'm a lost lamb. They don't know I am the alpha wolf. If you have ever been looked down upon by your own family because they didn't understand your value, sit down and hit that subscribe button. Because tonight, this mask is going to be ripped off, and the truth will make you cry tears of satisfaction. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly beneath the tires of my 2012 Ford Focus, a sound that seemed to announce my inadequacy to the entire neighborhood. I killed the engine, but I didn't get out immediately. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My hands, usually steady enough to defuse a wire or aim a sniper rifle from a mile away, were trembling. Not from fear, but from a familiar, suffocating cocktail of dread and exhaustion. Through the windshield, my parents' house in North Carolina looked like a postcard for the American dream. It was a sprawling colonial with white pillars, manicured hedges, and a lawn so green it looked painted on. But what caught my eye, what always caught my eye, was the fleet of vehicles parked in the expanded driveway. There was my brother's silver Mercedes E-Class, my sister's massive Lexus SUV, and my father's pristine vintage Jaguar that he only drove on Sundays. And then, there was my car. My rusted, dented gray hatchback with the "I love logistics" bumper sticker, leaking a tiny drop of oil onto their perfect concrete. It looked like a dirty stray dog trying to hide in a pack of purebreds. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back in a severe, practical ponytail, a flannel shirt over a plain t-shirt, and worn-out denim jeans. This was the costume of Amy the Failure. I had to wear it. It was my cover. But God, it was heavy today. I walked up the path, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifting through the open windows. It was a warm November evening, perfect for a barbecue, but the air felt thin and cold to me. I opened the door and the smell hit me instantly. Roasted rosemary, expensive cologne, and judgment. "Oh, look who decided to finally show up." A voice cut through the entryway. My mother, Eleanor, stood by the kitchen island. She looked immaculate, as always. Her hair was a helmet of blonde perfection, her pearls real, her dress a tailored silk that probably cost more than my rent. She didn't hug me, she didn't smile, she just scanned me up and down like a health inspector looking for a violation. "Amy," she sighed, the disappointment dripping from her voice like syrup. "We have guests, important guests, and you walked in wearing that?" She gestured vaguely at my flannel shirt as if it were contaminated. "Your sister Jessica is wearing the new collection from Nordstrom. She looks like a doctor. You look like you just changed a tire on the side of the interstate." "I drove straight from the depot, Mom," I lied, my voice keeping that practiced, low tone of apology. "The schedule was tight." "There's always an excuse," she muttered, turning her back to me to check the oven. "Just try to stay in the corner, okay? Don't make this about you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and moved into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the silver that had been in the family for generations. My siblings and aunts and uncles were already seated, a sea of white collars and polite smiles. "Well, well, if it isn't the long hauler," Uncle Jerry boomed from the end of the table. He was a large man, red-faced from too much scotch, wearing a suit that was straining at the buttons. "How's the big rig treating you, kid? Back still holding up? I tell you, that vibration destroys the spine. But hey, I guess it pays the bills, right?" A few cousins giggled. My sister Jessica, looking radiant and expensive, gave me a pitying smile. "We were just talking about my practice, Amy. Laser treatments are up 40% this quarter. It's exhausting being on my feet all day. But I suppose you understand physical labor, don't you? Yeah, I mumbled, pulling out the folding chair they had set up for me at the corner of the table. The kids' spot, practically. I understand. I looked down at my plate, forcing myself to pick up a fork. The injustice burned in my chest hotter than the hot sauce on the wings. They saw a woman whose biggest accomplishment was parallel parking a semi-truck. They didn't see the truth. Just 48 hours ago, I wasn't in a truck. I was in a dusty, sun-scorched command tent in the Middle East. I was Sergeant First Class Amy Paul, commanding a tactical intelligence unit. I was looking at satellite feeds, directing drone strikes, and coordinating the extraction of a high-value asset that saved an entire village from a sarin gas attack. Men twice my age, hardened Special Forces operators, stood at attention when I entered the room. They trusted me with their lives. They called me boss. But here, in this dining room in North Carolina, I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even an adult. I was just the disappointment who couldn't get a real job. You know, Jerry continued, chewing loudly on a piece of steak. It's not too late to go back to school, Amy. My buddy runs a paralegal course online. It's decent money, better than whatever this is. A woman your age shouldn't be smelling like diesel and fast food. I'm happy where I am, Uncle Jerry, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I had to keep it down. If I let the command voice slip out, if I let the SFC Paul tone surface, I would blow my cover. Happy, my mother scoffed from the head of the table. She raised her glass, the crystal catching the light. We just want you to have some dignity, Amy. That's all. I looked up at her. She was holding a glass of Napa Valley Cabernet. The wine swirled in the glass, a deep, rich crimson. It looked thick, heavy, and expensive. It was the symbol of everything they valued. Appearance, taste, status. To them, that wine was civilization. To me, in that moment, the red liquid looked like blood. It reminded me of the things I had seen, the sacrifices I had made to keep their suburban bubble safe so they could sit here and insult me. They sipped their wine, oblivious. I gripped my fork, staring at that swirling red liquid, feeling the silence around me grow deafening. They had no idea who was sitting at their table. They had no idea that the sheep they were mocking was the only thing standing between them and the wolves. But the night was young. And the wine was still flowing. The bathroom door clicked shut, and for the first time in 2 hours, I could breathe. I leaned my back against the cool wood, closing my eyes as the muffled sounds of Uncle Jerry's laughter and the clinking of silverware faded into a dull hum. I moved to the sink and gripped the porcelain basin until my knuckles turned white. I stared into the mirror. The fluorescent light was unforgiving. It highlighted the fine lines around my eyes, lines that my mother claimed were from squinting at the road while driving my truck. She was wrong. Those lines were carved by the desert sun and sleepless nights in a skiff. A sensitive, compartmented information facility. Watching drone feeds that determined who lived and who died. I splashed cold water on my face, watching the droplets run down my skin. I focused on my pupils, dilated, alert, combat ready. The woman staring back at me wasn't Amy the black sheep. She wasn't the failure who couldn't afford a Lexus. The mirror rippled, and suddenly, I wasn't in a bathroom in North Carolina anymore. 48 hours ago. Northern Syria. The air tasted like copper and ancient dust. The tactical tent was sweltering, the portable AC unit humming uselessly against the desert heat. The only light came from the bank of monitors glowing blue and green, illuminating the sweat on the faces of my team. Eagle 1, this is Sierra Actual. I spoke into the headset, my voice steady, devoid of the hesitation I feigned at my mother's dinner table. We have positive ID on the asset. 2 technicals approaching from the North Ridge. You are clear to engage. I repeat, clear to engage. Copy that, Sierra Actual. Birds are inbound. I watched the screen. Thermal imaging showed the heat signatures of the enemy convoy racing toward the village. A village full of women and children who had helped us. A village that would be erased from the map if I made a mistake. Sergeant First Class Paul, Captain Miller whispered beside me, his eyes glued to the feed. If we drop this payload and the intel is wrong. The intel is solid, sir. I cut him off, not with disrespect, but with the absolute certainty of someone who had spent 3 weeks tracking this cell. My guys on the ground confirmed the transponder codes. That's the shipment. If we don't hit them now, that chemical agent enters the city by dawn. I held my breath. My hand hovered over the confirmation key. This was power. This was responsibility. Not choosing which wine pairs with steak, but choosing to end a threat to national security. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The screen flashed white. The threat was neutralized. The village was safe. Good effect on target, the pilot's voice crackled. Heading home. Captain Miller exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He looked at me, nodding a silent salute. Good call, Sergeant. You just saved a hell of a lot of lives. I didn't smile. I just noted the time in the logbook. Just another Tuesday at the office. Bang, bang, bang. The sound hit me like a physical blow, shattering the memory. The dusty tent in Syria dissolved, replaced by the floral wallpaper of my mother's hallway. Amy, are you falling asleep in there? It was Eleanor, my mother. Her voice wasn't the voice of a commanding officer. It was the shrill, demanding tone of a woman who was worried her dessert soufflé would collapse. I unlocked the door and opened it. My mother stood there, holding a stack of dirty dessert plates. She thrust them into my hands before I could even speak. Honestly, Amy, you disappear right when we need to clear the table. Jessica needs to check her emails, and your brother is pouring drinks for the men. Be a dear and tackle the washing up, will you? The maid is off for the holiday, and you know how I hate leaving dirty dishes overnight. She didn't look at me. She didn't see the soldier who had just directed an airstrike. She just saw unpaid help. Sure, Mom, I said, the words tasting like ash. I've got it. I walked into the kitchen, the high heels of my female relatives clicking on the hardwood floors behind me as they retreated to the living room to discuss vacation homes and private schools. I stood before the mountain of greasy plates, leftover turkey bones, and half-emptied wine glasses. I turned on the faucet. The water was hot, scalding almost. I grabbed the sponge and started scrubbing. Scrub hard on that roasting pan, Amy, my sister Jessica called out from the other room, followed by a light laugh. God knows your hands are used to rough work. My hands would be ruined if I did that without gloves. Surgeon's hands, you know? I looked down at my hands. They were submerged in soapy gray water. Yes, they were rough. They were calloused from gripping M4 carbines, from climbing over compound walls, from digging defensive positions in the mud. They were strong hands, capable hands. Jessica's hands held scalpels to fix rich women's wrinkles. My hands held the line that kept Jessica safe enough to worry about wrinkles. I scrubbed a wine glass, the same Napa Valley Cabernet glass my mother had cherished. I cleaned it with the same precision I used to clean my service weapon. Every spot removed, every smudge erased. It is not the critic who counts, I whispered to myself, the steam rising around my face. It was a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. I had memorized it during basic training at Fort Jackson, and it had become my mantra during the darkest nights at Fort Liberty. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. My face wasn't marred by blood tonight, just the steam of dishwater. But I was in the arena. They were just the spectators in the stands, jeering and throwing popcorn, completely ignorant of the gladiator protecting the gates. Let them talk. Let them think I'm a failure. Their safety was my success. Their ignorance was my burden. That was the deal I made when I raised my right hand and swore the oath. But as I reached for the final roasting pan, a dark thought crept in, unbidden and cold. I looked at the living room where my family sat comfortable and oblivious. I imagined, just for a second, what would happen if I walked in there, threw my military ID on the coffee table, and played the classified body cam footage from Syria on their pristine 80-inch TV. Would they be proud? Would they finally respect me? No. I realized with a sinking feeling that they wouldn't be proud. They would be terrified. They preferred the lie. They preferred Amy the truck driver because she was safe. She was beneath them. Sergeant First Class Paul was a predator, a wolf who walked in the shadows they pretended didn't exist. And they were about to bring a different kind of wolf right into our den. If you have ever been the one doing the hard work in silence while others take the credit, or if you know what it feels to be underestimated by the people closest to you, I want you to hit that like button right now. And in the comments, just type Silent Warrior. Let's show the world that we know our own worth, even if our families don't. I dried my hands on a towel, the rough terry cloth feeling grounding. I had finished the mission in the kitchen. Now, I had to survive the rest of the night. But as I stepped out of the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice again, high-pitched and excited, cutting through the air like a siren. "Oh, Amy, come here. I have the most wonderful surprise for you." My stomach dropped. My tactical intuition, the spidey sense that had kept me alive in 3 war zones, started screaming. Danger. Danger close. The hum of the 18-wheeler's engine was usually my lullaby, a consistent, low-frequency vibration that settled deep in my bones and pushed away the chaotic noise of the world. It was the morning after the Thanksgiving disaster, and I was back in the cab of my truck, hauling a load of timber down Interstate 95. To the passing cars, I was just another anonymous driver in a flannel shirt and a baseball cap, a cog in the machine of American commerce. They didn't know that the cabin of this truck was swept for bugs daily, or that the encrypted satellite phone under the passenger seat connected directly to the Pentagon. Here, in this steel and chrome sanctuary, I felt safe. I felt in control. But that illusion of peace shattered the moment my cell phone buzzed against the hard plastic of the dashboard holder. The screen lit up with a photo I had assigned to the contact years ago. A perfectly manicured garden, beautiful but entirely artificial. "Mom," flashed across the display. I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to let it go to voicemail. My hands tightened on the leather steering wheel. I was a combat veteran who had stared down insurgents without blinking, yet a phone call from Eleanor Paul made my stomach churn with the anxiety of a scolded teenager. I tapped the speakerphone button, keeping my eyes on the stretch of gray asphalt ahead. "Hello, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm driving. Is everything okay?" "Amy, darling." Her voice filled the cab, overly bright and dripping with a sweetness that I knew from experience was usually a coating for bitter medicine. "I'm so glad I caught you. I was just worried you'd be in a dead zone, or whatever happens when you drive those big, awful machines." "I have signal, Mom. What's going on?" "You usually don't call this early unless someone is in the hospital." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "I called because I have wonderful news. You know, next week is the Family Appreciation Week at the base, right? The Officers Club is hosting that big gala on Friday night." I frowned. Of course I knew. My unit had been briefed on security protocols for the event days ago. But Eleanor Paul didn't go to military appreciation events. She found the base drab and the enlisted soldiers uncouth. "I know the event," I said slowly, changing lanes to pass a slow-moving sedan. "But why are you interested? You hate the base." "Well, things change, Amy. And honestly, I pulled a few strings with General Mitchell's wife. We play bridge together, you know. And I managed to get us a table. A VIP table." She paused for dramatic effect, waiting for my gratitude. When I stayed silent, she hurried on. "And the best part is, I have a surprise for you. A +1? My foot eased off the gas pedal involuntarily. "A +1? Mom, tell me you didn't." "Now stop it, don't use that tone with me," she scolded, the sweetness hardening just a fraction. "Just listen before you say no. His name is Nathan Cross. And Amy, he is a catch, a genuine catch." "I'm not looking for a catch, Mom. I'm working double shifts this week." "He's not like those boys you used to bring home," she interrupted, breezing right past my objection. "He's not a grunt, Amy. He's a defense consultant. He owns his own firm. Logistics, security, that sort of thing. Very high level. He travels to Europe constantly. And he drives a Porsche, Amy, a brand new 911 Turbos. Do you know what that says about a man? It says he's stable. It says he takes care of things." I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. It wasn't the Porsche, it was the job title. Defense consultant. In my world, that title was a catch-all. It could mean a legitimate analyst working for Boeing, or it could be a polite euphemism for a mercenary, a fixer, or an arms dealer operating in the gray zones where the Geneva Convention was just a suggestion. I don't care what he drives, I said, my voice firming up. I am not going on a blind date with a stranger so you can show off a son-in-law to your bridge club. I'm 39 years old. I'm done with this. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A heavy, loaded silence that I had learned to dread more than her shouting. Fine, Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden, practiced frailty. I suppose it's my fault. I pushed too hard. I looked at the calendar this morning, Amy, and I realized I'm 62. Your father's blood pressure is up again. We aren't going to be here forever. I rolled my eyes, though guilt, irrational and sticky, began to creep into my chest. Mom, don't do this. I just want to see you safe, she continued, a sob catching in her throat. Your sister is settled, your brother is settled, and I lie awake at night, terrified that when I die, you'll be all alone in that truck, wearing those flannel shirts, with no one to look after you. Is it so wrong for a mother to want to see her daughter taken care of before she's in the ground? Just one dinner, Amy. For me? Please. It was the ultimate weapon in her arsenal. The dying mother card. It was manipulative, it was toxic, and God help me, it worked every single time. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I could fight terrorists, I could defuse bombs, but I couldn't fight the ingrained programming of a daughter trying to please a mother who could never be pleased. One dinner, I said through gritted teeth. Friday night. But if he's a jerk, I'm leaving. He's charming, you'll see. Oh, thank you, Amy. You won't regret it. Wear something nice, not jeans. I'll text you the details. The line went dead before I could retract my promise. I let out a long, frustrated scream that bounced around the empty cab, useless and hollow. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, intending to turn up the radio and drown out the conversation. But I didn't turn on the radio. Instead, my mind snagged on the name, Nathan Cross. Eleanor saw a Porsche and a suit. She saw stability. But I had spent the last 15 years hunting men who hid behind expensive suits and vague job titles. Defense consultant. It was the perfect cover. It granted you access to military bases, clearance for sensitive conversations, and a legitimate reason to move large shipments of hardware across borders. A defense consultant who specialized in logistics and traveled to Europe constantly. And now, he was suddenly in North Carolina, sniffing around the largest military installation on the East Coast during Family Appreciation Week, a time when security was relaxed to let civilians onto the post. The coincidence didn't sit right. It felt like a loose thread on a sweater. If you pulled it, the whole thing might unravel. I checked my mirrors, spotted a rest area 1 mile ahead, and flicked on my turn signal. I guided the massive truck down the off-ramp, parking it amongst the other long haulers. I didn't get out to stretch my legs or grab a coffee. I killed the engine and reached under the bunk in the sleeper cabin, pulling out a ruggedized black laptop case. This wasn't a civilian computer. It was a government-issued Toughbook with direct uplink capabilities to the NSA database. I opened the laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dim cabin. I wasn't Amy, the dutiful daughter, anymore. I wasn't Amy, the truck driver. The shift in my demeanor was instant. My posture straightened, my eyes narrowed, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard. Let's see who you really are, Nathan, I muttered to the empty air. I typed in the name. Cross, Nathan. My mother thought she had set me up with a prince. She had no idea she might have just handed me the keys to the most dangerous case of my career. The trap was set, but she didn't realize that she wasn't the one holding the snare. I was. And I was about to find out if this rabbit had teeth. I drove the Ford Focus past the armed sentries at the access control point of Fort Liberty, with a nod that was far more confident than the one I gave my neighbors. The young MP at the gate scanned my CAC card, his eyes widening slightly as the system flagged my clearance level. He snapped a sharp salute, a gesture of respect that would have made my mother choke on her Chardonnay. I returned it with a practiced ease, the mask of the failure daughter, slipping away the moment my tires hit federal property. Here, amidst the geometric precision of barracks and the distant rhythm of airborne drills, I wasn't Eleanor Paul's disappointment. I was a weapon. I parked in a restricted lot behind a nondescript brick building that officially didn't exist on the public base map. I left my personal phone, the one tainted by my mother's desperate matchmaking, locked in the glove box. No electronics were allowed where I was going. I walked through the heavy steel doors, passing through 3 layers of biometric security: retinal scan, fingerprint, voice recognition. The final door hissed open, sealing me inside the CKF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. The air inside was recycled and kept at a constant frigid 68 degrees to protect the banks of servers humming in the adjacent room. It was a world of windowless concrete and blue-tinged LED light, a sanctuary of secrets that smelled of ozone and stale coffee. I sat down at my terminal, the ergonomic chair groaning under my weight. To anyone else, this was a sterile, soulless office. To me, it was the high ground. I cracked my knuckles and logged into the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communications System. The screen flickered to life, the secure network greeting me with a simple, blinking cursor. I wasn't searching for insurgents in the Syrian desert today. I was hunting a threat much closer to home. I typed in the name. Cross, Nathan. I hit enter and leaned back, expecting the wheel to spin for a few seconds. Usually civilian background checks were quick. A few speeding tickets, maybe a divorce decree, or a credit score that didn't match the flashy car. I expected to find a fraud, a man drowning in debt who needed a wealthy wife's family to bail him out. I was wrong. The screen didn't just populate a list of addresses, it flashed a jarring, bright crimson. Warning, classified file. Level 5, access required, flagged, Homeland Security, watch list, flagged, Department of State, ITAR violation. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a credit card scammer. The red warning banner was the digital equivalent of a siren screaming in a library. I inserted my command key, overriding the lockout with my credentials. The system hesitated, verifying my authority to view a file that was likely buried deep enough to keep a senator awake at night before slowly peeling back the black ink. The dossier that opened was thick. Nathan Cross wasn't just a defense consultant, he was a ghost, a broker, a parasite feeding on the chaos of war. I scrolled through the pages, my eyes scanning the data with the cold precision of a predator reading a trail. He had founded a logistics company, Cross Global Solutions, 5 years ago. On the surface, they shipped humanitarian aid and construction supplies. But the NSA intercepts attached to his file told a different story. There were shipping manifests from a port in Charleston, headed for shell companies in Turkey and Poland. The cargo was listed as medical optics. But the serial numbers. I zoomed in on the scanned invoices. I knew those numbers. I had signed out equipment with those exact prefixes for my unit. Generation 3 night vision goggles, thermal targeting scopes, high-end, restricted military technology that gave our soldiers the advantage in the dark. Technology that was strictly prohibited from export without direct congressional approval. And Nathan Cross was selling them to the highest bidder in Eastern Europe. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, heavier than lead. I clicked on a surveillance photo taken 3 months ago in a cafe in Odessa. There he was, Nathan Cross. He was handsome, I had to give him that. Chiseled jaw, expensive suit, a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was shaking hands with a man I recognized from a terror watch list, a known broker for separatist militias. My mother wanted me to marry this man. A bitter, dry laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the quiet room. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Eleanor Paul, the woman who cared more about appearances than anything else, the woman who looked down on me for wearing work boots, was practically begging me to bring a federal criminal into her home. She saw a Porsche and a suit and saw success. She didn't see the blood on his hands. She didn't know that the stability she craved was built on selling the very equipment that kept American soldiers like me, safe. If I hadn't looked, if I had been the dutiful, submissive daughter she wanted, I might have sat across from him at dinner. I might have let him buy me a drink. I might have let him charm his way into our lives while he used my family's connections to the base as a cover for his next shipment. He was here for the Family Appreciation Week. It made perfect sense now. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a reconnaissance mission. The base would be open to civilians. Security protocols would be relaxed for the gala. It was the perfect opportunity for a man like Cross to meet corruptible supply officers, to secure new routes, to find the weak links in the chain. He thought he was the shark entering a pool of goldfish. He thought he was going to walk into the officers' club, dazzle the wives with his wealth, and conduct his dirty business right under the nose of the U.S. Army. He didn't know there was a killer whale in the pool. I reached for the secure VoIP phone on my desk. My hand was steady now. The trembling from the driveway was gone, replaced by the icy calm of the mission. I punched in a 4-digit extension. Captain Miller, a gruff voice answered on the first ring. "It's Paul," I said, my voice low and hard. "I need a surveillance team on standby for Friday night. Priority 1. "Friday? That's the gala, Sergeant. We're already stretched thin with VIP protection." "This isn't protection, sir. This is a sting. I found the leak in the supply chain we've been chasing for 6 months." There was a pause on the line, the sound of a chair scraping as Miller sat up straighter. "You're serious? The night vision theft?" "I have the broker," I said, my eyes fixed on Nathan Cross's smiling face on my screen. "He's coming to the gala. He thinks he's meeting a nice, dumb civilian girl for a date. He thinks he's going to charm her mother and get the keys to the kingdom." "Who's the target, Paul?" "His name is Nathan Cross. And the civilian girl." I paused, a dark smile touching my lips. "The civilian girl is me." "You?" Miller sounded confused for a moment, then I heard a low chuckle. "God help him." "Get the paperwork ready, Captain, and tell the MPs to polish their handcuffs. A big fish is swimming right into the net. I'm going to make sure he takes the bait, hook, line, and sinker." "Roger that, Sergeant. We'll be listening." I hung up the phone. I looked at the red warning banner one last time before closing the file. Nathan Cross. "You wanted a date with Amy, Paul? You got one. But you aren't going to like how it ends." I pulled my CAC card from the reader, the screen going black. I stood up and smoothed down my flannel shirt. It was time to go home and pick out a dress. It had to be a dress that said harmless. It had to be a dress that said victim. Because on Friday night, the hunter was going to wear silk. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my small apartment, staring at a stranger. The woman in the reflection was wearing a navy blue, floor-length chiffon gown with long sleeves and a high neckline. It was a modest, almost severe dress, the kind of thing a schoolmarm would wear to a funeral, not a gala. It was exactly what my mother had requested. "Wear something that doesn't scream truck stop, Amy," she had texted me earlier. "Something that says you know your place." I smoothed the fabric over my stomach, feeling the cold, hard lump of the battery pack taped just beneath my ribcage. The adhesive was already starting to itch against my skin, a familiar irritation that grounded me in reality. This wasn't a date outfit. It was camouflage. I reached for the small skin-colored adhesive patch on my dressing table and carefully secured the microphone wire running up the center of my chest. It was a piece of military-grade tech, sensitive enough to pick up a heartbeat across a quiet room. Tonight, it needed to pick up a confession. "Check. 1, 2, I whispered, barely moving my lips. "Read you 5x5 Sierra Actual." Captain Miller's voice crackled in my right ear. I adjusted the pearl earring that concealed the tiny induction receiver. It was a custom piece, expensive and discreet, the only jewelry I owned that served a purpose other than decoration. "Signal is strong," I murmured, turning away from the mirror to sit on the edge of my bed. "Remember the rules of engagement, Miller. We do not move until he incriminates himself. I need him to say it. I need him to admit ownership of the shipment. If we bust him for just being here, his lawyers will have him out on bail before dessert is served. I want him buried." "Understood," Miller replied, his tone serious. "My boys are in the unmarked van 2 blocks east of the club. We're on a short leash. You say the word, we kick the door." "The word is Odessa," I said, strapping a neoprene holster around my right ankle. It was snug, designed to hold tight even if I had to run. I picked up my Glock 43, a slim, single-stack 9mm pistol. It was loaded with hollow points. I checked the chamber one last time, the brass glinting under the bedroom light, before sliding it into the holster. I pulled the hem of the long navy dress down. The fabric fell perfectly, concealing the weapon completely. Mom wanted a helpless daughter. She was about to be disappointed. I grabbed a small beaded clutch that contained nothing but my ID and a tube of lipstick I never used and walked out the door. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth, typical for a North Carolina autumn. I climbed into my Ford Focus, the suspension groaning slightly. It felt absurd to be driving this beat-up hatchback while dressed for a ball, but that absurdity was my armor. The drive to the base was a blur of highway lights and focused breathing. I navigated the familiar roads toward Fort Liberty, my mind cycling through the dossier I had memorized. Nathan Cross, logistics, night vision, treason. Every mile brought me closer to the man who was selling out my country, and closer to the family who thought he was a saint. I slowed down as I approached the main gate, flashing my military ID to the guard. He waved me through with a bored expression, not realizing that the woman in the cheap car was the highest-ranking NCO in the intelligence sector for this region. I drove toward the Officers' Club. The O Club was a grand, sprawling building with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn, lit up tonight like a Christmas tree. Valets were running back and forth, parking luxury sedans and sports cars. I bypassed the valet stand. I wasn't going to let some kid park my mobile command center, and found a spot in the back lot under the shadow of a large oak tree. I killed the engine and sat there in the darkness for a moment. Through the windshield, I could see the VIP row. There it was, the silver Porsche 911 Turbo. It sat there gleaming, aggressive and sleek, looking like it owned the pavement, and right next to it was my mother's pearl-white Lexus. The two cars looked like they belonged together, symbols of a life of comfort and excess. My Ford Focus, parked 50 yards away in the dark, felt like a watcher in the shadows. A wave of loneliness washed over me, cold and sharp. Inside that building, hundreds of people were drinking champagne, laughing, and celebrating family. My own mother was probably reapplying her lipstick right now, giddy with the excitement of showing off her new son-in-law. She had no idea that I was sitting out here with a gun on my ankle and a wire on my chest, preparing to destroy her illusion. I felt a heavy weight on my chest, the burden of the secret I carried. It would have been so easy to just be Amy the truck driver, to walk in, eat the chicken, smile at the jokes, and go home. But I couldn't. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel, bowing my head. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The words of Psalm 23 came to me automatically. They were the words my grandfather had whispered before D-Day. They were the words I'd whispered in the dust of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I wasn't alone. I had my team listening in the van. I had the truth on my side, and I had the training that had forged me into something harder than steel. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. My eyes snapped open. That was it. Tonight, the Officers' Club was the table, and Nathan Cross was the enemy sitting right across from me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting the sharp, predatory gleam fade from my eyes. I slumped my shoulders slightly, erasing the rigid military posture of a sergeant first class. I softened my jaw, practicing a shy, nervous smile. The transformation was complete. The wolf was gone. In her place sat the sheep, Amy, the disappointment, the lonely spinster truck driver who needed a man to save her. Showtime, I whispered to the empty car. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under my low heels as I walked toward the glowing entrance of the club. The music drifted out, a soft jazz melody that masked the thumping of my heart against the microphone taped to my ribs. My mother wanted a son-in-law to complete her picture-perfect family. Tonight, I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. A man who would change our lives forever. Just not in the way she expected. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the club's double doors, took a final breath, and pulled. The warmth of the room rushed out to meet me, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and impending disaster. The maitre d' led me through the crowded dining room of the officers' club, navigating a sea of dress blues and evening gowns. The air hummed with the polite murmur of conversation and the clinking of expensive silverware. A symphony of status that I had learned to tune out years ago. But tonight, every sound felt amplified, scraping against my nerves like sandpaper. My hand brushed against the side of my navy dress, feeling the solid, reassuring outline of the firearms strapped to my ankle beneath the flowing fabric. It was the only real thing in a room full of illusions. We approached the VIP section near the bay windows, where the tables were draped in heavier linen and the wine list didn't have prices. I spotted them instantly. My mother, Eleanor, sat with her back straight as a rod, her face plastered with that dazzling socialite smile she reserved for people who could do something for her. And across from her sat the target, Nathan Cross. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, looking like a man who owned the building. He wore a charcoal Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire truck, and a Rolex Submariner glinted on his wrist under the chandelier light. As I approached the table, the maitre d' pulled out a chair for me. In the South, and especially on a military base, there is an unwritten code of conduct. When a woman arrives at a table, the men stand. It is a reflex, a baseline standard of respect. Nathan Cross didn't move. He didn't even shift his weight. He just looked up at me, his eyes hooded and lazy, scanning me from the hem of my dress up to my throat. It wasn't a look of greeting, it was an appraisal. He was looking at me the way a buyer looks at a used car, checking for dents and scratches. "Amy!" my mother exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave. She kicked me gently under the table, a silent command to behave. "You made it. And look at you. You look so sensible." "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice quiet. I turned to the man who was currently selling night vision optics to our enemies. "And you must be Nathan." "Pleasure," Nathan said, finally extending a hand across the table without bothering to sit up straight. His grip was soft, damp, and lingering. "Your mother has told me so much about you. The famous truck driver." He said truck driver with a faint smirk, as if it were a punchline to a joke I wasn't smart enough to understand. "I work in logistics," I corrected him gently, taking my seat. "Logistics," Nathan chuckled, picking up the bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet that was already open on the table. He poured wine into my glass without asking if I wanted it. "That's a big word for hauling timber up and down I-95, isn't it? But hey, someone has to do the heavy lifting so the rest of us can enjoy the view." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of genuine anger and the performance I had to maintain. "I suppose so," I murmured, staring at the red liquid swirling in the crystal. "He's just teasing Amy," my mother interjected quickly, terrified I would ruin the mood. She leaned toward Nathan, touching his arm lightly. "She takes everything so seriously. That's her problem. She's been on her own too long. She needs someone to lighten her up." "I can see that," Nathan said, taking a sip of his wine. He swirled the glass, staring at me over the rim. "You look tense, Amy. Shoulders up to your ears. You know, driving those rigs destroys a woman's posture. It's physically demanding work. Not really meant for the fairer sex, is it?" My fingers clenched in my lap, digging into the silk of my dress. Under my ribs, the tape holding the wire pulled tight against my skin. Record this, I thought. Record his arrogance. "I manage," I said, keeping my eyes downcast. "It pays the bills." "Does it?" Nathan asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Does it really pay the bills? Or are you just scraping by? Because let's be honest, Amy, you're what, 39? Living in an apartment, driving a 10-year-old Ford?" He gestured around the room with his fork, encompassing the wealth, the uniforms, the power. This is where you should belong, not at a rest stop eating vending machine sandwiches. Nathan is just trying to help, dear, Eleanor added, her eyes pleading with me to agree. He runs a very successful global company. He knows what success looks like. Actually, Nathan interrupted, slicing into his medium-rare ribeye steak with surgical precision. Blood from the meat pooled on the white china. I was thinking about that on the drive over. My firm, Cross Global Solutions, is expanding. We have a massive front office in Charlotte. Marble floors, air conditioning, espresso machines. He pointed his steak knife at me. I need a new executive secretary. Someone to sit at the front desk, look pretty, answer the phones, and greet my clients. You'd be good at it. You have that sturdy look. And I'd pay you double whatever you make grinding gears in that truck. The insult hit me like a physical slap. He was offering me a job as a receptionist. Me, a sergeant first class who had coordinated drone strikes and dismantled terror cells. He wanted me to fetch his coffee and smile at his crooked business partners while he sold out my country from the back office. Double? I asked, forcing a tremor of awe into my voice. Double, Nathan confirmed, chewing his steak. Plus benefits. All you have to do is wear a skirt, smile, and do exactly what I tell you. It's time you let a man take the wheel, Amy. You've been driving in circles long enough. My mother beamed, clapping her hands together softly. Oh, Amy, did you hear that? It's a miracle. You wouldn't have to ruin your hands anymore. You could work in a nice office. Nathan, you are a saint. Truly a saint. I looked from my mother's ecstatic face to Nathan's smug, oily grin. The urge to flip the heavy oak table was so strong my muscles twitched. I wanted to draw the Glock from my ankle, shove the barrel into his expensive entree, and read him his Miranda rights in front of the entire room. I wanted to scream at my mother that the man she was worshipping was a traitor, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed the confession. I needed him to talk about the shipment. I took a deep breath, forcing the wolf back into her cage. I picked up my wine glass, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of restraining my own lethality. If you have ever had to sit there and smile while someone insulted your intelligence, your career, or your life choices just to keep the peace, I want you to hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type, I am worth more. Because we all know the feeling of being underestimated. And tonight, we are going to see what happens when the underestimated finally fight back. I lowered the glass and looked Nathan Cross dead in the eye. I softened my gaze, widened my eyes, and put on the best performance of my life. You're right, Nathan, I said, my voice trembling with fake gratitude. I'm tired of driving, and you are incredibly generous. I don't know what to say. Nathan winked at my mother. See, I told you she just needed the right motivation. He turned back to me. Welcome to the big leagues, Amy. Now, eat your salad. You look like you need the nutrition. Thank you, I said, cutting a piece of lettuce. But if I'm going to work for you, I should probably know a bit more about the business. You said logistics? That sounds fascinating, especially the international part. Nathan's chest puffed out. The bait was in the water, and the shark was opening his mouth. Logistics is really just a fancy word for problem solving, Amy, Nathan said, leaning back in his chair with the air of a professor lecturing a slow student. He took a long, indulgent sip of his wine, his eyes glinting with self-satisfaction. You see, moving timber is simple. You pick it up, you drop it off. But global logistics? That's an art form. You have to navigate customs, tariffs, local regulations. It requires a certain mental agility that most people just don't have. I nodded slowly, slicing a small piece of my steak. I chewed methodically, letting him dig his hole a little deeper. He was enjoying this. He loved the sound of his own voice, and he loved the idea that he was impressing the poor, simple-minded truck driver and her desperate mother. It sounds incredibly complex, I said, my voice soft and breathless, feigning admiration. Mental agility. I like that. I suppose that's why you're so successful, Nathan. You see the things that other people miss. Exactly, he beamed, pointing his steak knife at me. You catch on quick. Maybe there's hope for you in the corporate world after all. My mother, Eleanor, let out a delighted little laugh, clapping her hands together. See, Amy, I told you Nathan was brilliant. He deals with the whole world. He's not stuck on the interstate like you. The whole world, I repeated, tasting the words like a sommelier tasting a vintage. That must be exhausting, especially with the geopolitical climate being what it is. I imagine certain regions are riskier than others. Nathan waved his hand dismissively. Risk is just another word for opportunity, Amy. If you know who to pay and who to shake hands with, borders are just lines on a map. Is that so? I dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin, placing it neatly on my lap. I've been reading about that. I listen to a lot of audiobooks on my long drives. It keeps me awake. Audiobooks! Nathan chuckled, sharing a conspiratorial look with my mother. How quaint. Actually, I continued, my tone shifting almost imperceptibly. It wasn't louder, but the warmth had drained out of it, leaving something cool and hard underneath. I was listening to a report about the Black Sea trade routes. I heard that the port of Odessa is a nightmare right now. Total gridlock. Nathan's glass halted halfway to his mouth. It was a subtle pause, a micro-expression of confusion. He blinked once, then forced the glass to his lips. Odessa? Well, yes. Ukraine is a volatile region, but we handle mostly humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid, I echoed. That's noble. But I heard the gridlock isn't about food or medicine. It's about specific containers being flagged, especially the ones containing sensitive optical equipment. Nathan set his glass down. A drop of red wine splashed onto the white tablecloth, staining it like a drop of fresh blood. He stared at me, his brow furrowing. The arrogance was still there, but a crack had appeared in the porcelain. Optical equipment? He asked, his voice tighter than before. I don't know what kind of audiobooks you're listening to, Amy, but they sound like conspiracy theories. Oh, Amy, don't be boring, my mother sighed, rolling her eyes. Odessa? Is that in Texas, dear? Or is it the one near Disney World? I always get those mixed up. The absurdity of her comment hung in the air, thick and heavy. She was sitting in the middle of a high-stakes interrogation and thought we were discussing vacation spots. I didn't look at her. I locked eyes with Nathan. I didn't blink. I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the weight of my stare. I wasn't Amy the truck driver anymore. I was the interrogator, and he was the suspect in the chair. Not Texas, Mom, I said, never breaking eye contact with him. It's a major hub for the gray market. You know what the gray market is, don't you, Nathan? Nathan shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat, pulling at his silk tie as if it had suddenly become a size too small. I'm in the business of solutions, Amy. Not whatever this is. Of course, I smiled, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. It was a shark smile. But it must be hard to find solutions when the Turkish customs authorities are cracking down on end-user certificates, specifically for Generation 3 night vision tech. I read that a lot of consultants are getting their shipments seized in Istanbul because the paperwork doesn't match the cargo. The color drained from Nathan's face. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his jaw and worked its way up, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the chandelier lights. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. End-user certificates? My mother asked, frowning. Amy, stop using that jargon. You sound like you're speaking Chinese. Talk about something pleasant. Nathan, tell her about your house in the Hamptons. But Nathan wasn't thinking about the Hamptons. He was staring at me with the dawning horror of a man who realizes he has walked into a cage with a tiger. He looked at my sensible dress, my pulled-back hair, my rough hands. And then he looked into my eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of fear. He realized that a truck driver doesn't know about Generation 3 night vision. A truck driver doesn't know about end-user certificates in Istanbul. A truck driver doesn't look at a predator with the eyes of a bigger predator. Who? He rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Who told you that? I have friends in logistics too, I said smoothly. We talk on the radio. You'd be surprised what you pick up on the open channel. For instance, I heard there's a massive investigation into a company called Cross Global Solutions. Something about violating the international traffic in arms regulations. But that's just trucker gossip, right? Nathan's hand shook violently. He tried to pick up his fork to hide the tremor, but his fingers were numb with panic. Clang! The heavy silver fork slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers and hit the fine china plate with a sound like a gunshot. Heads turned at the nearby tables. A general paused mid-sentence. My mother gasped, putting a hand to her chest. "Nathan, are you all right?" she cried, reaching for his hand. "You're pale as a ghost." Nathan pulled his hand away from her as if she burned him. He was breathing hard now, short, shallow gasps. He looked at the door, then back at me. He looked like a trapped rat searching for a sewer grate. I need, he stammered, his confident baritone reduced to a squeak. I reached across the table. I moved slowly, deliberately. I picked up the pristine white linen napkin from the breadbasket. I held it out to him, dangling it just inches from his sweating forehead. "You seem flushed, Nathan," I said, my voice dripping with mock concern, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Are you hot? Or is the air in here just a little too thin for you?" He stared at the napkin. Then he stared at me. The realization hit him fully. I wasn't just a bad date. I wasn't just a nuisance. I was the end of his career. I was federal prison wrapped in blue chiffon. He snatched the napkin from my hand, dabbing frantically at his upper lip. I have to make a call," he mumbled, pushing his chair back. The legs of the chair screeched against the hardwood floor, a harsh, grating sound that made my mother wince. "Now?" Eleanor asked, confused and hurt. "But we haven't even had dessert." Amy was just making conversation. "I'll be right back," Nathan lied, standing up on shaky legs. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't look at the room. He looked only at me, with a mixture of hatred and terror that fueled my soul. "Don't be too long," I called after him, cheerful and bright. "I'd hate for you to miss the surprise." As he turned to hurry toward the exit, aiming for the restrooms near the side door, I calmly reached up and adjusted my pearl earring. "Target is on the move," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the jazz music. "He's heading for the southeast exit. He's panicked. He's going to try to run." "Copy that, Sierra Actual." Captain Miller's voice came back, crisp and ready. "The net is tight. Let him run." I picked up my wine glass, the same glass I had stared at earlier with such resentment. I took a sip. It was bold, complex, and deeply satisfying. It tasted like victory. Nathan pushed his chair back fully, the legs screeching against the polished hardwood floor like a banshee's wail. He was already half turned away from the table, his eyes darting toward the exit sign glowing red above the double doors. He looked like a man whose house was burning down, and he was the only one who could smell the smoke. I really must go," he stammered, not daring to look at me. "Something has come up. Urgent business. Eleanor, it was lovely. Amy. Goodbye." He took a step. Just one. "Sit down, Nathan." I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The voice that came out of my throat wasn't the soft, apologetic murmur of Amy the truck driver. It wasn't the voice of the daughter who fetched the wine or washed the dishes. It was the voice of Sergeant First Class Paul. It was a command voice, a tone honed on firing ranges and in tactical operations centers, designed to cut through chaos and override the human instinct to disobey. It was cold, flat, and hard as reinforced steel. The effect was instantaneous. Nathan froze mid-step, his back stiffening as if I had pressed a gun barrel to his spine. The chatter at the tables immediately surrounding us died out. A colonel 2 tables away lowered his fork, turning his head slowly to assess the threat. "Amy!" My mother gasped, her face flushing a deep, mortified crimson. She looked around the room, offering frantic, apologetic smiles to the onlookers. "What has gotten into you? You are shouting in the officers' club. Sit down and stop making a scene this instant. You are embarrassing the family." I said sit down, I repeated, ignoring my mother completely. I didn't even blink. My eyes were locked on the back of Nathan's expensive suit jacket. "The exit is blocked, Nathan, and you aren't going to make it to the parking lot." Nathan turned slowly to face me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the cornered, feral look of an animal realizing the trap has snapped shut. "Excuse me?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice low, trying to maintain the charade for just one more second. I don't know who you think you are talking to me like that, but I have a business to run. I am leaving. You don't have a business anymore, I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to a register that vibrated with lethal intent. At 1800 hours tonight, federal agents executed a search warrant on your warehouse in Charleston. They found the crate marked medical supplies. They found the thermal optics inside. And they found your signature on the shipping manifest. The color didn't just drain from his face, it vanished, leaving him looking gray and clammy. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air on a dock. Amy, what are you talking about? Eleanor whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for her wine glass. Charleston, warehouses. Have you been drinking? This is insanity. Nathan, please, ignore her. She's not herself. On the contrary, Mom, I said, never taking my eyes off the target. I am finally myself. I stood up. I didn't stand up like a tired woman with a bad back. I stood up smoothly, powerfully, my shoulders rolling back, my chin lifting. The navy chiffon dress flowed around me, but the posture underneath was pure military discipline. I wasn't slumping anymore. I towered over the table. Federal Warrant 49 Bravo, I recited, the numbers crisp and clear in the silent dining room. Conspiracy to violate the international traffic in arms regulations, providing material support to foreign entities, fraud, and treason. Nathan took a stumbling step back, his hands shaking violently. You're a driver. You're a nobody. I am a senior non-commissioned officer in the United States Army Intelligence Corps, I corrected him, my voice projecting clearly to the silent room. And you, Nathan Cross, are under arrest. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. My mother sat frozen, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and horror. She looked from me to Nathan, her brain unable to process the shift in reality. Her failure daughter was commanding the room. Her perfect son-in-law was trembling like a coward. Nathan looked at the side door. He saw two large men in suits, Captain Miller's team, step out from the shadows near the kitchen, their hands hovering near their waistbands. He looked at the main entrance. The uniformed MPs were there, blocking the path. He was trapped, and he knew it. But panic makes men do stupid things. It short-circuits logic and replaces it with desperation. Nathan looked at the armed men, and then he looked back at me. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a woman in a dress. He saw a target. He saw a human shield. "You bitch!" he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. He didn't run for the door. He lunged across the table. It was a clumsy, desperate move. He scrambled over the white tablecloth, sending the wine bottle crashing to the floor, shattering into 1,000 red shards. He reached for me, his fingers clawing for my throat, intending to grab me, to pull me in close, to put a steak knife to my neck and demand a way out. "Amy, look out!" my mother shrieked, finally reacting. Time seemed to slow down. I watched him coming. I saw the sweat flying off his forehead. I saw the wild, dilated pupils. To a civilian, it was a terrifying assault. To me, it was telegraphing a move in slow motion. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I didn't scream. I planted my feet. I shifted my weight to my left leg, engaging my core. My hand moved instinctively to the hem of my dress, not to smooth it down, but to clear the fabric. He thought he was attacking a sheep. He was about to find out exactly why wolves don't fear dogs. "Bad move, Nathan," I whispered. As his hand reached for my neck, I didn't cower. I stepped into his space, meeting his violence with a controlled, calculated force that he, in his arrogance, never believed existed in a woman like me. The dining room of the officers' club was about to become a combat zone, and Nathan Cross had just brought a knife to a gunfight. Nathan's fingertips brushed the silk of my dress, his breath hot and sour with panic and expensive wine. He was close enough that I could see the veins bulging in his forehead, close enough to smell the fear pouring off him. My muscles coiled, ready to deliver a strike to his solar plexus that would drop him to his knees. But before I could move, the double doors of the officers' club didn't just open, they exploded inward. "Federal agents, get on the ground, now!" The shout was a thunderclap, synchronized and overwhelming. It wasn't one voice. It was a wall of sound designed to disorient and dominate. 6 men in heavy tactical gear stormed into the dining room, their boots hammering a rhythm of judgment against the hardwood floors. The soft jazz music died instantly, replaced by the chaotic symphony of a raid. Nathan froze. For a split second, his brain tried to process the impossible shift from a high society dinner to a federal takedown. That second was all the time the lead MP needed. A blur of motion tackled Nathan from the side. It wasn't gentle. It was the brutal, efficient geometry of law enforcement. Nathan hit the floor with a sickening thud that rattled the silverware on our table. The wind was knocked out of him with a guttural oof. And before he could even draw a breath to scream, a knee was pressed firmly into the small of his back. "Hands! Show me your hands!" the agent screamed, pressing the muzzle of a carbine against the back of Nathan's expensive Italian suit. "Don't shoot him!" my mother shrieked, jumping to her feet and knocking her chair over. She was hysterical, clutching her pearls with trembling hands. "He's a businessman. He's a consultant. You have the wrong man. Amy, tell them. Tell them who he is." I didn't say a word. I stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, like the eye of a hurricane. I watched as the man who had mocked my career, who had offered me a job as a secretary, was twisted into a pretzel on the floor. "Get off me," Nathan sputtered, his face pressed against the dusty floorboards. "Do you know who I am? I know General Mitchell. This is a mistake." "Nathan Cross, you are under arrest for violation of the Arms Export Control Act and conspiracy to commit treason," the agent recited, his voice flat and bored, pulling Nathan's arms back until I heard the distinct, satisfying click, click, click of stainless steel handcuffs tightening. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "My shoulder! You're breaking my shoulder!" Nathan whined, writhing uselessly. "Stop resisting," the agent barked, hauling him up to his knees. Nathan looked up then. His hair was disheveled, hanging in his eyes. His nose was bleeding from the impact with the floor. He looked at the room full of officers, at the shocked diners staring in silence, and finally, his eyes found me. There was no arrogance left, only the hollow, terrifying realization that he had been played from the very beginning. My mother was sobbing now, clinging to Uncle Jerry's arm. "Jerry, do something. Call the police. These men are assaulting him." "Eleanor, shut up," Uncle Jerry whispered, his face pale as a sheet. He was staring at the patches on the agent's shoulders. "Those aren't police. That's military intelligence. That's CID. The commotion at the door quieted down as the sea of tactical gear parted. A hush fell over the room, heavier and more profound than the silence before the storm. Captain Miller walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was dressed in his Class A dress blues, immaculate and sharp, his chest decorated with a rack of ribbons that told a story of service and sacrifice. He didn't look at the diners gawking at him. He didn't look at the sobbing woman in the pearl necklace. He didn't even look at the traitor bleeding on the floor. He walked straight toward me. His footsteps were measured, deliberate. The sound of his heels clicking on the floor echoed in the silent room. He stopped exactly 3 paces in front of me. My mother held her breath. Uncle Jerry's mouth hung open. They were waiting for him to arrest me too. They were waiting for him to ask the truck driver what she was doing in the middle of a federal operation. Captain Miller snapped his heels together. The sound was like a pistol shot. He stood tall, his posture rigid, his expression one of absolute professional reverence. Slowly, sharply, he raised his right hand to the brim of his cap. It was a salute. It wasn't a casual wave. It was a crisp, perfect rendering of military courtesy. And in the strict hierarchy of the military, a commissioned officer like a captain generally does not salute an enlisted soldier first. Unless that soldier is the operator in charge, the architect of the victory, the one who led the way through the valley of the shadow of death. For a suspended moment, the image burned itself into the retinas of everyone in the room. The decorated captain saluting the woman in the simple navy dress. "Target secured, Sergeant First Class Paul," Miller said, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "The warehouse in Charleston is clear. The assets are recovered. Your vehicle is waiting at the curb, ma'am." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Not of sadness, but of a fierce, burning pride that threatened to crack my ribs. This was it. This was the moment the mask dissolved completely. I shifted my weight, standing tall in my heels. I squared my shoulders, mirroring his posture. I looked him in the eye, and with a slow, deliberate motion, I raised my hand to my eyebrow, returning the salute. "Well done, Captain," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Have the prisoner processed. I want the interrogation logs on my desk by 0800. "Yes, Sergeant," Miller replied, cutting his salute only after I dropped mine. He turned to the MPs holding Nathan. "Get him out of here." As they dragged Nathan Cross toward the door, he didn't struggle anymore. He just hung his head, defeated. He didn't dare look at me again. The room remained deadly silent. I slowly turned my head to look at the table where my family sat. My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at me as if I had just sprouted wings and breathed fire. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on me with a mixture of terror and awe. The glass of wine she had been holding was tipped over on the table, a dark red stain spreading across the white cloth, dripping onto the floor. But she didn't notice. Uncle Jerry, the man who had mocked my big rig and my aching back, looked like he had swallowed a lemon. He was looking at Captain Miller, then at me, trying to reconcile the niece who drives a truck with the Sergeant First Class, who just gave orders to an officer. I held my mother's gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just let her see me. For the first time in 39 years, she wasn't looking at Amy the disappointment. She was looking at the wolf. She was looking at the shield. She was looking at the stranger who had been sitting at her table all along, eating her food and enduring her insults, while silently keeping the monsters at bay. "Amy," she whispered, the name trembling on her lips like a question she was afraid to ask. Who are you?" It was the question she should have asked years ago. But now, the answer was standing right in front of her, draped in silk and steel. I reached down and picked up my small beaded clutch from the table. "I'm the logistics expert, Mom," I said softly. I pick up the trash, and I drop it off. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the door, following Captain Miller. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, hundreds of them. But the only thing I felt was the lightness of my steps. The weight was gone. The secret was out. And the air had never tasted so sweet. The night air outside the officers' club was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat and tension of the dining room I had just left. I walked over to the low stone wall bordering the parking lot and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean oxygen of the North Carolina autumn. Behind me, the flashing blue lights of the military police cruisers were fading as they escorted Nathan Cross toward the detention center, a procession of justice that I had orchestrated with a single phone call. I heard the heavy oak door creak open behind me, followed by the tentative click of heels on the pavement. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The rhythm of the footsteps was familiar, hesitant, shaky, stripped of its usual confident cadence. "Amy." The voice was small. It wasn't the voice of Eleanor Paul, the socialite who judged my shoes and my career. It was the voice of a mother who had just realized she didn't know her own child. I turned slowly. My mother stood under the yellow glow of a street lamp, wrapping her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders as if she were freezing. Her mascara was smudged, and she looked older than she had an hour ago. The artifice was gone. The mask of the perfect suburban matriarch had cracked, leaving a confused, frightened woman underneath. "You didn't go with them," she said softly, gesturing vaguely toward the departing police cars. "Captain Miller, he offered you a ride." "I have my own car, Mom," I said, leaning back against the stone wall. "I prefer to drive myself." She nodded, looking down at her shoes. The silence between us stretched out, heavy with the weight of 39 years of misunderstandings. I could see the questions churning in her mind, fighting with her pride. "You lied to us," she whispered finally, looking up at me. There was no accusation in her tone, only bewilderment. All these years, the trucking, the long shifts, the dirty clothes, it was all a lie? It wasn't a lie, Mom. It was a cover I corrected her gently. I do drive. I do travel long distances. I just don't haul timber. I haul intelligence. I don't navigate highways. I navigate operations. But why? Her voice cracked and a fresh tear traced a path through her foundation. Why let us treat you like a failure? Why let Jerry make those jokes? Why let me? She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, the memory of her own cruelty hanging in the air between us. Because it kept you safe, I said, my voice steady. If people knew who I really was, if they knew the things I know, you would be a target. Nathan Cross is just one shark, Mom. There are bigger ones in the ocean. Being Amy the disappointment was the best armor I could give you. It meant no one looked at you twice. She stared at me, her lips trembling. She took a step closer, searching my face as if seeing it for the first time. She looked at the faint scar on my chin, the calluses on my hands, the steel in my eyes. She was finally seeing the soldier, not the daughter she had tried to mold into a housewife. I didn't know, she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. I just wanted you to be happy. I wanted you to be safe. I thought you were lost. I know, Mom, I said softly. I pushed off the wall and closed the distance between us. I didn't salute her. I didn't lecture her. I did the only thing a daughter could do. I wrapped my arms around her. She stiffened for a second, then collapsed into the embrace, burying her face in the shoulder of my navy dress. She cried for the embarrassment, for the fear, and for the years of judgment she couldn't take back. I held her, feeling her frailty. She wasn't a villain. She was just a woman from a different generation, terrified of a world she didn't understand, trying to force me into a box that made sense to her. I'm not lost, I whispered into her hair. I never was. We stood there for a long moment, the wind rustling the leaves of the oak trees above us. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes, trying to regain a shred of her dignity. You looked very impressive in there, she sniffed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Terrifying. But impressive. Captain Miller seemed to think you hung the moon. He's a good officer, I said. He knows the value of good intel. Well, she sighed, smoothing down her shawl. I suppose I have some explaining to do to the bridge club. And to Jerry. Tell them whatever you want, I shrugged. Tell them I got a promotion. Tell them I'm a consultant. Just don't tell them the truth. The truth stays between us. She nodded solemnly, a new secret pact forming between us. Okay, Amy. I walked her to her Lexus, waiting until she was safely inside with the doors locked. She rolled down the window, one last time. Drive safe, she said. It was the same thing she had said to me 1,000 times before, but tonight, the words carried a different weight. It wasn't a command. It was a prayer. Always, I promised. I walked across the dark lot to my Ford Focus. It sat there, humble, indented, invisible in the shadows of the luxury cars. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I peeled off the wire taped to my ribs, wincing as the adhesive pulled at my skin, and tossed the device onto the passenger seat next to my clutch. I drove out of the base, passing the guard gate. The young MP saluted me again as I passed. I nodded, merging onto the highway, heading back toward my quiet apartment, back to the solitude that was both my burden and my sanctuary. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the exhaustion of a mission accomplished. The threat was neutralized. The asset, my family, was safe. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. I glanced at the screen. A text from Mom. You aren't lost, are you? I smiled, the blue light of the phone illuminating the dark cab. I picked it up and typed a reply with one hand, my eyes flicking back to the road. No, Mom. I'm exactly where I belong. I put the phone down and gripped the wheel with both hands. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. Most people look at the dark and see fear. They see the unknown. They need the lights, the noise, the validation of others to feel safe. But someone has to watch the dark. Someone has to stand on the wall while the city sleeps. Someone has to be the one who isn't afraid to look into the shadows and stare back at the monsters until they blink. They call us sheepdogs. They call us operators. They call us silent professionals. My family might never fully understand. They might still wish I wore nicer clothes or drove a better car. But tonight, they would sleep soundly in their beds. They would wake up tomorrow and complain about the coffee and worry about the weather, completely oblivious to how close the wolf came to their door. And that is enough for me. I am Amy Paul. I am a daughter. I am a sister. But above all, I am the watchman. And my watch is never over. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the silent guardian of your own family, or if you simply believe that true value isn't found in a job title or a bank account, please share this story. You never know who needs to be reminded that they are not lost. They are just leading the way in the dark.